We are pretty bad at starting these podcasts, but I guess like
We're bad at cold opens.
bad at cold opens, bad at starting our podcast, good at finding people who are smart to talk to. Hi, Eric. You run research at PIX11 in New York. Tell me about that for 12 seconds.
Okay. Well, all the data goes through my department, the data about audience consumption, what they're watching, what they're doing online, what they're doing with their mobile phones with us, anything with how we reach our audience and how our audience reaches us. All goes through us, quantitative and qualitatively, used for sales purposes, used for audience development purposes, and anything to build our brand within the community.
How about what's the end all be all answer to measurement on broadcast? Spoiler alert, is there a none of the above answer?
There isn't one. We use quantitative, mostly Nielsen, some ComScore, at least in New York. ComScore is bigger in some other markets. And we use that with a mix of qualitative data. If you want to know how many Asian Americans watch our news while standing on their head and eating macaroni and cheese, we can tell you that based on survey data if they ask those questions. And so we can use that we couple that data with quantitative information. So here's how many people watch and who's watching. Specifically for sales, this is useful because then they can go to their buyers and say, we have who you need to reach. And this is why you need to advertise with us.
And you straddle both departments. You're not just sales and not news, right? How does that work?
I'm not just sales, I'm not just news, I'm not just promotions, I'm everything. So I have regular meetings with the sales department, I have regular meetings with the promotions department, I have regular meetings with the news department. Should we promote more in Queens? Should we do more stories in Yonkers? Should we pitch such and such a client in such and such an industry that may be stronger now during the pandemic than it was before? This industry is a growth industry. This one is not. How do we address this one? How do we address that one? How can we sell to both? How do we approach these people to advertise with us online, on our air, on our mobile website, whatever?
Any notable changes that you've seen kind of over the last 2 years about either the way that people interact with your properties from, broadcast to digital, or what is the state of the union these days in terms of the way people consume PIX?
Well, it depends on the time of day. So if we're doing year-to-year comparisons right now, everybody's up in the morning because more people have returned to their regular routines than a year ago. And whereas last year they were working from home or the kids weren't in school, so they weren't really watching TV at 5:30 in the morning or 6 in the morning. And now we're seeing that day part up across all sectors. Whereas daytime tends to be down because fewer people are home during the day. So whereas daytime viewership skyrocketed for a period last year, now it's returned to more or less normal. I'm using the air quotes on that because there really is no normal anymore.
Yeah.
And the commuting varies too, because people who may commute in from further out may watch the news starting at an earlier time of the morning. And so maybe 4 a.m. and 4:30 a.m., people further out in New Jersey or close to Philadelphia or up in the Catskills will watch the morning news earlier. But then as it gets later, you have more people tuning in at 6 a.m. and 5:45 a.m. Those are the people who commute within New York City and don't have as far to go. So it depends on the geographic factors as well. So that's from a linear standpoint, viewing standpoint, that's how it looks there. But from a qualitative standpoint, you have some of the obvious things and some not so obvious things. Like travel is not so much down. International travel is down, of course, and a lot of domestic travel is down. Maybe cross-country travel or whatever is down. But road trips, people are doing a lot of those. So there's still people driving within 50 miles of their home, which is roughly the DMA, the designated market area, the TV market. So instead of advertising tourism for a foreign country, we may pitch more local tourism upstate or in New Jersey or closer to Philadelphia or whatever. because those are the kinds of trips people have been taking more in the pandemic. Now things may be opening up a little bit more. Hopefully there's no more variants coming out anytime soon. So you're going to see more of that international travel open up. Autos have been an issue because there haven't been any new cars because of the chip situation, right?
Oh my gosh.
There are fewer chips, and so there's been fewer new cars.
If
So
you're anything like the rest of the country at PIX, and I'm not going to ask you to give that away because that's like but these companies, these car companies keep having to pull all their advertising inventory from the station because they'd love to sell you a car. They have no shortage of people who want a car. It's just that the cars aren't there to sell.
right. So what we do is we pivot to another part of the business, targeting auto repair, because people are now putting money into their 15-year-old cars to try to make them last 16 years, or longer. And they're keeping up their cars more than they would have before all this. So we just have to look at things a little differently and try to follow the people with what they're doing now in the reality that we're all in.
So, I mean, you're already making people smarter when you say start targeting the auto mechanic and car repair shops to put into those slots for the advertisers you've lost for car sales. I've worked with some stations who have done that, but you're saying it to people who maybe haven't been given that advice yet. So that's super helpful. Megan and I have been kind of in this constant, Megan, I keep speaking for you. I don't mean to speak for you, but I feel like we're on the same page here.
Go for it.
Like auto repair, how do you put a QR on that spot so you can measure it better than you could before? How do you put a QR on whatever it is? But like, if I was making spots right now and I had to quickly fill for a auto dealer who had to pull again, even though they were promised for this quarter for X amount, you could put just someone trying to jump their car for 30 seconds. And next to it, it's a QR code that says, schedule a checkup for your car and make sure you're not stuck in the cold, whatever it is. And suddenly you're giving people a point where they can hold up their phone and say, I'm here and I'm interested in whatever it is you're showing me. And you have not the exclusive way to measure audience, but a better idea about who's watching and when. And if you kind of hold that relationship, see, these are the things that I get like really dorked out about as far as QR codes go and the ways to measure. Big believer in there shouldn't be phone numbers or websites on our broadcast product anymore. I think it should all be QR codes. And I'm not just saying that as a guy who sells QR codes.
Okay, so here's my question though, is Eric, let's talk about the current currency that you're using to measure, right? So like we're talking about, impressions or rating points that are calculated based on what? Third-party surveys, right? And what do you feel is, do you feel in any way like that's a limited picture, or how do you feel about the accuracy of audience data? Like, tell me about
Grips.
Yeah. Tell us about the current way that audience is measured and how that could be better. Like if you had if
the only way to be truly accurate with measuring audience content consumption is to have somebody with a notebook following everybody else around, and that is not feasible in any way, shape, or form for many, many reasons. Nobody wants to be followed around by somebody with a notebook writing down everything they're watching and everything they're clicking on. So you have to do a lot of paneling, a lot of sampling. Obviously cookies are going away, but there's some of that usage as well. And with TV, one limitation that TV measurements always had is we know how many people are watching based on the sample, but we don't always know if they're watching at that moment, if they're watching that particular spot. What if they went to go get something out of the refrigerator while the commercial's on? We don't know that. We assume they're sitting there watching the ads, but we can't absolutely guarantee it. That's just been the way it's always been with the limitations of passive measurement. So there's some active measurement with Nielsen, but also, with QR codes, you can actually now show who's interacting with your product, who's there. We know they watched the spot because they scanned. We know they watched your segment, your branded segment or whatever, because they scanned with their QR code. And we know roughly where they are. And we know also if they have been converted to a customer, in terms of their interactivity with the product, to a certain degree. So there's a little more clarity on who you're reaching, and that you are reaching people that are interacting with you and your product. Attribution is a big thing now in the TV business, trying to attribute, correlation between seeing an ad and interacting with the product, or ultimately purchasing the product or becoming a subscriber of the product. So this could be used, QR codes could be used to some extent in that regard also, because we now could have information on who saw your spot, and what percentage of the audience clicked through, so to speak, or scanned through to get more information about your product, or to take action once they saw that they could.
I see a point, and the value in gross rating points and measuring by gross rating points, and selling reach and frequency based on those in like a 1997 to 2005 zone. Like I can see where that was when those were maybe most effective. I feel like, and I'll make it more of a question. How do you see grips, gross rating points, and reach and frequency changing in today's television landscape?
Well, Nielsen's methodology changed with the start of this year. So whereas the previous methodologies all had the qualifiers that you had to receive the TV signal over an antenna, cable, or via satellite to be part of the sample. Now, as of January 6th, the start of the January measurement period for 2022, Nielsen's including broadband-only homes in the sample that don't necessarily have any of those three. Not necessarily, they don't have any of those three. The cord cutters. And so those people were not included in viewership previously. So now they are.
Which is a problem, right? Because, you must have a pretty decent sized streaming audience, right? So like that wouldn't be counted by Nielsen until the addition.
If you watch this on YouTube TV or Hulu Plus or one of the other streamers, the virtual MSOs, your viewership was counted if you also had antenna, satellite, or cable. Now,
but if you're like Nick or myself and you don't, and you're purely just a digital viewer,
right,
not included in your audience at all.
Correct. But now you are. But you're also bringing into the sample a whole bunch of people who are not predisposed to watching broadcast television. And you've got more people who might be using it for Netflix or Disney Plus or Amazon Prime or so. So ratings are percentages of the total audience available. And so now what happens is the ratings go down because you've got smaller percentages of larger viewing pools right now. And as a consequence, most of the industry has shifted over to selling by impressions instead of ratings.
Okay.
Ratings are still a thing periodically, but for the most part, it's shifted almost entirely to impressions. And so what that means is that impressions go up. Your ratings may go down, but your total impressions do go up because now you're bringing in these other people who are watching you in these other ways that were not counted before.
Okay.
So you're going to reach more people, and so the reach will go up, especially if you've got unduplicated viewers, which is the technical definition of reach. And so that is very beneficial to everyone once you're talking about total number of viewers. It takes a little getting used to for people who've spent years or decades working with just ratings, because cost per points now become cost per thousand, and they're not always uniform, or ratings minimums for some advertisers now have to be converted to impressions minimums, which are going to vary by market.
Sure.
Because a rating in New York is going to be worth many more people than any other market. The number one market, say, if you're in the number 50 market, a 1.0 rating is going to be represent far fewer people than a 1.0 rating in New York, where there are 20 million people.
So there's an extra layer of granularity on that measurement then, if you're breaking it down to like actual impressions as opposed to just a percentage, I suppose. Like as a media buyer, or like if I were a media buyer, I think I'd be pretty stoked about the idea that I don't know. I mean, being stoked about the idea that it's like impression based, and that to me feels a little bit more accurate, and also kind of enables like cross-platform buying a little bit easier, I suppose. Like if it's like the same unit of measurement across the board. I don't know. I don't feel like that's relevant.
That's true. But unfortunately, the video use online and linearly, if that's even a word, linearly.
I think it can be now.
It is now.
It is now. I coined a word. Congratulations.
The title of the episode.
You guys have done it. And so they're measured differently, because you have to watch 5 minutes of a quarter hour on linear television, but the definition on online video is going to be far different, right? You're not watching 5 minutes of a quarter hour of videos on websites or stories. They're not even that long. If you're watching a story that was posted as something that we did on our linear air, it won't even be, it's necessarily not going to be 15 minutes. This is the same story. So they're for now, they are completely different units. I mean, they're technically the same unit of measurement, they're an impression, but technically speaking, they're also completely different, right? An impression from linear TV is going to be very different from an impression on video online.
Not all impressions are created equal, I suppose.
Correct.
How do you think, I mean, is there a value, and let's spoil it really quick. You're not a Flowcode client. We're not using you. We're talking to you because we want to know more about the measurement side of our business. How do you think QR codes can change, enhance, or replace the current methodology?
They're not going to replace current methodology of Nielsen, the qualitative and quantitative, but they can be used as a supplement to all of that data. Because if you have a segment and you know that you had 1,300 people scan, and you had 10,000 people watching the show, that's a really, really good response rate, scan rate, right?
Yeah.
Far better than you're going to get from banners online. Or other various methods of interactivity. And so you have, with QR codes, you have the ability to get first person data for your market without setting up focus groups or doing surveys of your viewers. You can actually get information from these people directly. So you can use that to confirm suspicions, or maybe, confirm that your suspicions are wrong about your audience too. It's an extra set of data, and all data is useful. If it's valid data, it's useful.
Yeah.
So you kind of look at everything instead of just Nielsen. We look at Nielsen, we look at ComScore, we look at the qualitative arm of Nielsen, and so there's other things we can use instead of just counting total number of viewers. Because in this world we're in today, we want to know how many are watching, but we also want to know who is watching. We want to know if the people watching are people that we can sell to, or that we should be selling to, or that we should approach for selling to make revenue. We want to know if the people where we're reaching can be are numbers that can be boosted, and if so, how? Where do we go? Do we go to Brooklyn? Do we go to the Bronx? Do we go to Queens? Do we go to Western Queens or Eastern Queens? South Bronx or the northern part of the Bronx? I mean, there's so many different things to do, and geographically, and in New York, you've got so much diversity as well. It's the largest and most diverse market by far. the largest African American population in the country, and the second largest Hispanic and Asian populations in the country, after Los Angeles. And so we've got that spread out over 29 counties, over 4 states. Long Island is part of this market, and if it was its own market, it would be something like the equivalent of Milwaukee or Cincinnati in size. Brooklyn alone would be the same size as one of those markets. Chicago is less than half our size, and it's the number 3 market.
Listen, this isn't the Chicago versus New York episode yet. So.
Well, I am talking about the size and scope of New York, and Chicago is so big and diverse, yet it's still less than half the size of New York. And we can address that more in depth on another conversation.
We'll also talk about pizza on that episode, but
we have pizza. You guys have casseroles.
Listen, I will admit that deep dish pizza is pretty disgusting. So you got us there.
It depends. It depends on the scenario and the mood you're in. And it's not soup pizza. Anyway, I can bring you guys together again for a moment under the banner of QR.
Of course.
That's just it. It's additive measuring, new ways to talk to, or you said, any valid information is good information. I think that the one thing that I worry about or caution, you're in New York, the number one place to do television and measure the people you're doing television for. What do people in rural Alabama stations do to make sure that they're measuring best? And, because a lot of them won't have the Nielsen and the ComScore and the research director position. How do you help them?
Every TV station tries to figure out its audience as best that it can.
Sure.
And so they'll use whatever system of methodology Nielsen uses in their market. And in New York, it's different than it would be in rural Alabama. But that system is what they would use to figure out who's watching and in what areas. And then they would use that information to target via outdoor or social media or whatever other methods they might use. And they can target geographically as well. In rural Alabama, the sample sizes would be different. And in some cases, they wouldn't be very useful if you've only got 2 or 3 people. And even in New York, if you've got only a handful of people, it's not useful data because it's not statistically valid. So you could join zip codes together to do the northern half or the southern half of the counties, things like that. There are things you can do to group the areas. Now, I don't know the geographic regions of, for your example, rural Alabama, but I'm sure there are ways to group zip codes or community areas to look at those in specific areas to advertise to. And billboards may be more effective there than they would be in New York. So maybe look at that in concert with a social media campaign. And some of your audience do the social media campaign because of people's preferences via Facebook and what they click through on Facebook and what they list as their own preferences and likes on Facebook. So you have that data right there as well. So a Facebook campaign in concert with an outdoor campaign might be the way to go there. And then you see if it has an impact on the quantitative numbers, and then you kind of go from there.
But it sounds like what you're saying is whatever you're doing, you need to try, measure, evaluate, and then repeat the wins.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Listen, the data is going to be different in different places. Everybody's got different proclivities and different market sizes and whatever. So you just have to use what data is available to you. And some of it may not be as sound as you might like statistically, but it is what it is. And, you have to use what's available. And so if you use QR codes, you have to use them, I think, selectively to try to figure out your soft spots in your audience and where you can build better. And conversely, you can also see where you're strong. If you see this message, scan it and tell us about yourself. I don't know how viable it is to do that on a regular basis, but periodically, you could have a giveaway, have a Zoom with an anchor, that they watch on TV, and they can win a Zoom with an anchor for 10 minutes or something. And for doing that, they fill out 3 or 4 questions on their phone after they scan the QR code. And that way the station gets to learn a little bit more about their audience directly. So doing kind of de facto primary research right there.
The 2 questions that I've got for you.
Sure.
The first one is, what is the most valuable 1 to 3 points that you can get about the viewers in the market anywhere America? And then the second one, and this is an opinion thing, what are your thoughts on billboard and outdoor campaigns for news brands specifically?
Okay, well, for that part, billboard and outdoor, it depends on the market and the area.
Sure.
In New York, we can do mass transit campaigns, which aren't available in a lot of other markets. In some cases might be preferable. So if we want to increase our audience in the Bronx, and I'm just making this up, if we want to increase our audience in the Bronx, we would pick a subway line that goes heavily in the Bronx.
Sure.
Or Brooklyn or whatever. Or we could do a campaign on the Long Island Railroad if we want Nassau and Suffolk counties and want to try to increase our brand awareness with those folks. And then we could also do an outdoor billboard campaign, traditional billboard campaign in Long Island or New Jersey, or parts of Queens or Brooklyn where people drive more. Whereas, in most of Manhattan and parts of the Bronx and Brooklyn and Queens, people don't drive as much.
Yeah.
Percentage wise, so it wouldn't be as valuable. Plus, there are billboards in Manhattan. I mean, there's a few when you're coming off the bridges and coming off the tunnels, but there's precious few of them relative to other areas of the country.
I don't know that I noticed that until you just pointed it out. Sidebar, sorry.
I'm here to help, Megan.
I asked because like a lot of other markets where there isn't the commute times and high traffic areas, GMs and creative services directors will go to, we need a billboard campaign on the highway, and that's going to raise our rating. I think the most effective billboards usually are something you can act like hot coffee next stop, like things that let you know I can get off the highway and get something, McDonald's arches or Starbucks, green, whatever. I forget sometimes that there are these areas where high commute spots and high foot traffic areas are valuable for outdoor campaigns. So that's just my personal campaign against billboards and creative services directors trying to spend $23,000 on billboards in Green Bay, where there's just not the same interaction. I've tangented. What's the most valuable information stations can get about their viewer to do something to serve that viewer?
If we know, the more we know about our viewers, the better we can serve them. If we know what their concerns are, then we know better what news stories to cover. There's certainly not a one size fits all in any market, let alone one as big and diverse as this one. A story that plays well in central Brooklyn may not play well on the North Fork of Long Island. Or down in New Jersey, you still have to make it play in Fairfield County, in Connecticut, which is part of our market as well. So the more information you have about your viewers, the better you can target what you're presenting to them, and the more of a relationship you can foster with them, which is huge for local TV. The stronger the relationship, then the stronger your brand, and the stronger their interaction with you, and the more, frankly, the more revenue you can bring in, because based on the more people that pay attention to you, whether it's on linear or online or whatever the case may be.
This is you've opened my eyes on a couple things, and I have to change my opinions on a couple small things, like maybe billboards. Are you willing to come back for follow-up questions that we may and probably will have?
Yeah, sure.
Cool.
Yeah, especially if it's with Megan talking about how Chicago compares to New York, even though the Chicago-New York rivalry only exists in Chicago.
All I have to say is trash removal in alleys.
How many Chicagos can you fit into New York?
Yeah, I have to.
I don't even know the answer to that
I
question.
like that. But Megan, you may have me on that one, because when we walk around New York, you know, it's very common to say that is a gorgeous pile of garbage. You know,
But
I was gonna say, you're
you also use that word as a verb, which is interesting.
What'd you say?
I've never heard the word tangented before, but I like that.
No, we're really doing good at creating vocabulary today. Linearly, tangented.
we just flow coded it.